I'm Possum.
These are the mascots that just tried way too hard to make you like them. Not because they had good games, but because they wanted you to think that they're just way too cool. Characters that just acted like they were too awesome to even be in a game in the first place. The early 90s was one of the more desperate periods in gaming history, at least for characters in games. A gold rush of animal mascots, each one louder and more aggressively cool than the last. And today, we're going to be taking a look at 3 of the most committed attempts. 3 characters that tried so hard to be cool that the effort's almost painful to look at 30 years later.
He's so rad, he's my real cool radical Rick.
Hey guys, welcome back. These are the 16-bit mascots that just tried way too hard. We've got a bobcat who never stops talking about himself, a possum who wants to save the environment and tell you how awesome he is, and a fire-breathing dinosaur on a skateboard who's described on his own box art as too hip to be extinct. So we obviously got a lot of badness to wade through today. So grab your favorite pair of sunglasses and let's get into it. First up, we're going to start with the most famous failure in this whole video.
I like it.
Bubsy the Bobcat is the poster child for pretty much everything the early 90s got wrong about mascot design. He's just one of those characters that never met a one-liner that he didn't immediately start spouting out.
What could possibly go wrong?
And Bubsy II, which came out in 1994 for both the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, is the game that was supposed to prove that he deserved the hype. Unfortunately for Bubsy though, it just kind of proved that he didn't deserve the hype, even if it is a better and more interesting game than the first one. The original Bubsy came out back in 1993 from Accolade, and believe it or not, it actually sold really well, which probably had something to do with the fact that this Bobcat was pretty much plastered all over gaming magazines back then. Reviews for the game were mixed at best, but sales were actually strong enough that Accolade immediately greenlit a sequel, a Game Boy version, and, believe it or not, an animated pilot, an actual cartoon episode that aired on Fox in 1993 as a test for a potential Bubsy cartoon series, because that was apparently what all of us kids were wanting at the time. The pilot itself featured Bubsy making approximately 47 jokes in 22 minutes, and at no point does anything that happens in the pilot suggest that a full series was a good idea. And Fox happened to agree with that.
Do we have to go through this every single morning?
The sequel was actually designed by Cindy Kirkpatrick, and the working title for the game during development was Bubsy II Still No Pants. The final title is the more conservative Bubsy II, which tells you the marketing department eventually got involved. The structure for the game is actually kind of ambitious this time. Where the first game was more of a linear stage progression, Bubsy II is instead set inside a giant museum called the Amazatorium. You start in a lobby hub and choose which wing that you want to tackle, and the levels branch out from there. It's definitely more open than anything the first game attempted, and on paper gives Bubsy II more structure and replayability than most mascot platformers from the time. And if you play the original, you'll probably feel right at home here, but Bubsy's moveset did get an upgrade for the sequel. The biggest probably being that he can now take 3 hits before dying, which is a huge change from the original's brutal one-hit deaths that made the first game feel unfair in ways that had nothing to do with skill. Though the game does have a ton of obstacles that'll kill you in one hit, so you still gotta watch out. Bubsy still has his glide ability for crossing long gaps, and there's now power-ups scattered throughout the levels that Bubsy can actually use this time. Stuff like a Nerf gun that actually gives you a projectile attack, and even an underwater suit that lets you go underwater instead of dying in one hit to puddles on the floor. Keeping the positive train rolling, the levels in the game actually have a really good amount of variety and include stuff like medieval castles, outer space, ancient Egypt, whatever this is, and actually a ton more. Say what you will about that first Bubsy game, but it did have a good amount of variety throughout the entire game, and Bubsy II easily tops that. And that includes the crazy amount of mini-games that you'll find in each level, like rolling through tubes as an armadillo, blasting frogs across a lake for points, and even using that aforementioned diving suit to navigate underwater sections. So coming into this, if you were just wanting more Bubsy, Bubsy II definitely gives it to you, for better and worse. but this is Bubsy, and you know it's not going to be all good news. And unfortunately, two of its biggest issues from the first game come back to haunt it here. The first being that Bubsy still just moves too damn fast. He still does that weird thing where he'll walk at a normal pace for a second, and then he'll just bust into a full-on sprint the next, leading to you constantly starting and stopping just so he doesn't run full speed off of a cliff into yet another one-hit death. And the stages just aren't designed for that kind of speed, so I don't know why they kept it in the game. And that brings us to the level design. The levels themselves are huge, and sometimes just figuring out where to go is the biggest challenge in a level. And thanks to Bubsy getting blasted all over the place by random stuff, it gets really annoying. Also, sometimes the level design just doesn't make any sense, like going into a door that leads you one place and then going back through the same door that leads you to a totally different part. There are at least arrows pointing you in the direction that you're supposed to be going this time, but it still just kind of feels like luck whenever you do make it to the end of a stage. And we can't talk about Bubsy without mentioning just how much he talks, like constantly.
Do you believe in miracles?
He has over 200 voice samples in the Super Nintendo version, and he deploys them without mercy.
I win!
And it doesn't help that Bubsy has that specific nasal tone to him that gets old as soon as you hear it on the title screen.
I like it!
Still though, Bubsy 2 is a better game than the first Bubsy. The improvements to the game are nice, but the fundamental problem with Bubsy was never that it was a completely awful game. It was mainly due to the fact that the game asked you to spend time with Bubsy, and Bubsy's just exhausting. And as good as the first Bubsy sold, this one did not. Bubsy 2 was such a disappointment that Accolade actually brought back the original creator, Michael Berlin, for a third game and decided the series needed a complete reinvention. That reinvention ended up being Bubsy 3D for the PlayStation in 1996, which is widely regarded as one of the worst 3D platformers ever made. But constant failure has never stopped Bubsy. In fact, Bubsy 4D just got released in 2026. It's kinda hard not to love this damn bobcat for trying, I guess. As for Bubsy 2 though, well, if you liked the first game and wanted something a little bit better, then this is probably worth playing. But for most people, this bobcat is probably better left for us weirdos that still enjoy his goofball nonsense. But having said all of that, I need you to understand one thing for this next game. Because as much mess as I just talked about Bubsy, Awesome Possum makes that game look like an all-time classic.
I'm awesome!
If Bubsy was the mascot who tried to out-Sonic Sonic through sheer personality, Awesome Possum took a different approach. He was going to out-Sonic Sonic and save the environment while he was doing so. He was going to be the first video game character ever to carry an actual ecological message alongside his attitude. And to top it off, he was going to have digitized speech that made Bubsy's voice look modest by comparison. Awesome Possum Kicks Dr. Machino's Butt, which yes, that is the full name, came out for the Genesis in November of 1993. Developed and published by Tengen, this one ended up being one of the most concentrated examples of early 90s mascot hubris that's ever been committed to a cartridge. Back in 1992, Tengen hired designer Richard Seaborn specifically to develop an environmentally themed platformer. But this wasn't going to be just another tired mascot platformer. Instead, it was going to be a tired mascot platformer about saving the environment. Because, say it with me, kids,
which was the style at the time.
But there was some logic to it because stuff like Captain Planet had been on TV since 1990 and been really popular. Plus, recycling campaigns were everywhere back then. And the idea of a conservation-themed kids platformer wasn't obviously a bad one. And personally, I don't think it's that bad of an idea either. It just turned out that everything else about this possum was a bad idea. The Sonic influence in Awesome Possum is not subtle at all. Awesome Possum runs fast, can turn into a spinning ball to attack enemies, and is fighting a mad scientist who's destroying the natural world. That's not this game's big problem though. In fact, there were probably dozens of games copying Sonic at any given time.
Wow, that was incredible!
But this game's biggest problem, I mean, just look at it. First of all, the game only seems to be running at like 15 frames per second most of the time, making everything look really choppy, especially when you're moving as fast as this game seems to want you to move.
Boy.
And when you got controls this bad on top of all that, you've got one of the worst feeling games that I've ever touched. Like, this is up there with Bebe's Kids as far as how awful it feels to play. Awesome Possum slides across the ground, overshoots platforms constantly, and handles with a slipperiness that feels more accidental than intentional. Even just trying to jump on top of an enemy takes way more effort than you could ever imagine for what's supposed to be a basic mascot platformer. And the only thing that you can do in this game is jump. Like, literally, I'm not kidding, that's the only thing. Every button on the controller jumps. And just like Bubsy, Awesom's getting blasted all over these stages, usually directly into pits or enemies, with almost nothing that you can do to avoid it. Mainly thanks to the stage design just being a hodgepodge of platforms and pits. Also, we get the trifecta here, since there's no invincibility window whenever you take damage, which means that a cluster of enemies can drain your entire health bar in like 2 seconds with nothing that you can do about it.
Now you've got it, got it.
And you're doing all of this while this possum is constantly screeching one-liners at you.
All right.
Yes, just like Bubsy, Awesome talks a lot.
I'm awesome.
And he's somehow even more annoying than Bubsy, and I'm not sure how you can even manage that. He's constantly saying stuff like, "I'm so awesome," and "way past cool," and just dozens of other phrases that constantly mention his own greatness approximately every few seconds. Everything you do or pick up will cause Awesome to say something, and it's almost always the worst possible thing you could imagine someone saying. Admittedly, the sheer amount of digitized speech was nothing short of a technical achievement on a cartridge in 1993, but Tengen used that achievement to make Awesome Possum tell you how cool he is on a loop for the duration of every level.
That was incredible.
Thankfully, and I mean this genuinely, Tengen does give you the option to turn off the voice in the options menu. And I'm not kidding when I say that this is the most satisfying thing you can do in the entire game. But what about that whole environmental angle that the game is supposed to have? Well, Awesome is fighting against a bunch of robots that are dead set on destroying the environment, which, I mean, that's okay, it's not too bad. But the game actually goes out of its way to market itself as something that could educate kids about the environment. And just how did they get away with doing that? Well, they put a multiple choice quiz at the end of every single stage, asking you questions about recycling and pollution and all that stuff. Getting answers right gives you bonus points, which you don't need, and getting them wrong costs you absolutely nothing. The quiz only seems to exist because someone needed to justify its marketing, and this is what they came up with. Awesome Possum is probably the Mascot War's most overcommitted casualty. Bubsy at least had a somewhat decent game underneath his personality. Awesome Possum, though, delighted everyone with bad controls on top of a nearly unplayable game, with a mandatory quiz at the end of every single stage. And if that wasn't bad enough, they put the loudest and most unlikable character possible as the main character.
Your heart out, Dr. Mosquito.
And to tell you just how much confidence Tengen had in this game, they released it in the Christmas holiday season of 1993. The same year when stuff like Aladdin, Mega Man X, and even Sonic CD came out. But I genuinely hope that none of you kids ended up with this game under the tree, because this possum should be out in the dumpster where he belongs.
Your heart out, Dr. Mosquito.
And finally, we got one whose tagline tells you everything you need to know before you even look at the box. Radical Rex, too hip to be extinct. He's a Tyrannosaurus Rex, he's on a skateboard, he breathes fire, and his girlfriend is named Rex-Ann. Radical Rex came out in October of 1994 for both the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. Beam Software, the developer, was an Australian studio that had been making games since the early 80s, with stuff like Castle of Terror on the C64 being fairly well known at the time. They'd worked on licensed properties including Shadowrun for the Super Nintendo, and by then had a reasonable track record for the era. In 1993, Beam tossed out a little game called The Baby T-Rex for the Game Boy, which was actually tossed around to other publishers in an attempt to license it out as a licensed property, which actually ended up happening when High Tech turned Baby T-Rex into We're Back, A Dinosaur's Tale. But Activision was always hunting for something they could use to break into the mascot platformer market, and Baby T-Rex was just sitting there ready for a 16-bit glow-up. The transition from Baby T-Rex to Radical Rex involved adding the skateboard mechanic, giving the character fire breath attacks, and jamming enough dude into the game to embarrass even kids at the time. And to show you just how serious it was at being radical, the Super Nintendo version actually starts with a full-on rap, complete with lyrics. So please try not to cringe too hard as you listen to this.
Real cool radical Rex.
Radical Rex.
He's my real cool radical Rex.
For whatever reason though, the rap was actually left out of the Genesis version, and whether that rap is something worth missing is a question that I'll let you decide. Get into the game though, and Radical Rex is pretty much exactly what you think it is. A side-scrolling platformer with a few various moves that you can do. Rex can breathe fire, which is his primary long-range attack that can also be upgraded into a projectile, and he's also got a jump kick for close-range combat, though it's barely useful as an attack because you're rarely in position to land it intentionally. To the point where the fire breath becomes the solution to almost everything because it's the only thing that works reliably. Of course, since you're extremely radical, you have your skateboard that you can find in certain sections for faster, more extreme ways to get through the stage. You also get a roar attack that hits everything on the screen at once and lasts longer the more charge you have. Plus, you collect eggs scattered through the levels for points and a bonus stage if you collect enough of them by the end of the level. And I hope any of this actually sounded fun to you, because this is basically all you're doing across all 10 stages in this game. The levels that you'll be doing all this stuff on are pretty okay, with your standard prehistoric locations like jungles and swamps, though there are some highlights like being able to navigate the inside of a dinosaur and a pretty neat dino graveyard that's heavy on the platforming. The skateboarding sections in the levels are probably some of the most fun, since if you can learn the right path through them, you can breeze through a lot of these levels pretty quickly. It's fast and actually kind of fun. I just wish there were more of them in the game. Also, it doesn't help that the difficulty in the game is on the easier side, which I imagine was for appealing to younger players, but for a character that was marketed to be too hip to be extinct, the game itself is a bit too breezy and cartoony for a lot of the attitude branding that's surrounding it. Also, there's one genuinely strange detail between the Genesis and the Super Nintendo versions, well, besides that rap. They've both got completely different villains. The Genesis version has you fighting Scritch, an evil gopher-like creature who wants mammals to rule the world and has cast a spell turning dinosaurs against each other. The Super Nintendo version has you fighting Sethron, a human wizard that's basically doing the same thing, so I'm not really sure why they changed it. And as far as I know, I don't think this has ever been explained. It's just a really weird change. But if there's one big issue with Radical Rex, it's just that it's fine. It looks decent and it plays okay. Radical Rex is the most inoffensive game in this entire video, which is almost the most damning thing that you can say about it. But what Radical Rex is, more than anything else, is just a game that arrived too late to the party that it was dressed for. For reference, Donkey Kong Country came out later that year in November and basically shut the whole Mascots with Attitude thing down on arrival. Radical Rex shipped into a market that was already looking for anything other than another tired mascot with attitude. At the very least though, it's a hell of a time capsule for a time when all a game needed to exist was a rap about how cool you are. And that's gonna be it for this week, because I'm obviously not cool enough to deal with all these mascots. As bad as they were though, I still remember a lot of these games pretty fondly. And if you guys did as well, then let me know in the comments if you got a kick out of their too cool for school attitudes. And while you're at it, give this video a thumbs up if you happen to enjoy watching it. And maybe even a sub to the channel if you want to see some more weird mascots in the future. As for me, I gotta go find my sunglasses and go over my new catchphrases, because we got another video coming next week, and hopefully you all show up to watch it. But anyway, thanks for watching this one. I'll see you next week.